Over the course of one's car collecting lifetime, there are some vehicles that you just end up passing on, and maybe later on you wish perhaps you had it. And I think this is one of those vehicles that falls into that category. This was a 1986 AMC Eagle sedan that I looked at a number of years ago, and I ended up passing on in part because I already had an Eagle sedan. And, well, I just couldn't quite come to the right agreement with the seller on the price. And I'll talk about why I passed on it. But take a look at the window sticker here. This was a loaded Eagle. It basically stickered for about $14,700 and included everything from the really cool optional wheels to power windows, locks, air conditioning, rear window defogger, tilt wheel, power driver's seat, the aluminum wheels, as I mentioned, AM/FM cassette radio, left and right electronic mirrors. It was basically just a loaded car. It did have the floor console and the gauge package there too. So let's take a look at this vehicle now and talk a little bit more about it. And here it is, finished in garnet metallic, a beautiful color for these Eagles, and you can see it also has the optional fog lights. Now by 1986, all Eagles had this power dome hood that you see here, that had started out as being part of the SX4 package in earlier years. But the SX4 by 1986 was long gone. And in 1985, all of the Eagles got that power dome hood. They lost their hood ornament as well as the trim molding that ran down the center of the hood. I think it was a good look overall, but the other look before with the hood ornament was also a good one too. But as I said, this car was finished in garnet metallic, and if you take a look at the side here, you can see that it's just a beautiful color, especially in the sunlight on this Eagle. And of course, you can see those optional aluminum wheels, which are quite handsome. Now, for 1986, the Eagle was coming to about the end of the run. Only 1,290-ish of these four-door sedans were sold. There are a total of about 8,200 Eagles sold, with the balance being wagons. So super rare vehicle here, and the 4.2-liter six-cylinder underhood was the only engine that you could get. It made 110, 120-ish horsepower. Wasn't a very fast car, but it was quite torquey. And strangely, by this point, the Eagles had previously had a Chrysler Torque Flight transmission that had a lockup converter, but in 1986, that lockup converter was gone. I'm guessing because of cost reasons. And here you see the back of this vehicle, and again, quite handsome in this color. This was actually one of the reasons why I didn't end up buying this car, was that it had some previous body work right above that rear wheel, and the paint was checking a bit from the Bondo underneath. And according to the seller, that must have been done by the selling dealer before he even bought it, because the car was never in an accident. It wasn't a lot of Bondo repair, but it was something that I knew for myself I was going to have to get corrected, and that wasn't going to be a cheap repair. And if the car hadn't had that, I probably would have bought it, because it otherwise was super solid. Now, 1988 was the last year for the Eagle, but by that point, it just had a wagon. There was no sedan like this. The last year for the sedan was 1987, when only 454 were sold. And in that year, about 5,000 wagons were sold, so a total of about 5,000 to 6,000 units of production. In 1988, the last model year for the Eagle, only 2,300 units were produced, and those were all station wagons. Now here's where it gets fun, is the interior. You can see this car has a lot of options in it. That floor shift console, you can't quite see the gauges in this picture. I got another one where I'll show that to you, but you can pick up the cruise control on the end of the turn signal stalk, the tilt wheel, the deluxe steering wheel with the faux wood grain. I think that actually looks pretty tasteful. The AM/FM cassette radio there in the center stack, the gauge package, which includes an RPM gauge. Ooh, I think these engines redlined at about 4,500 RPM. But you get to see what the RPM is. And then, of course, on the door panels, you can pick up on the power locks as well as the power windows. Notice also the fog light switch that almost looks like an aftermarket add-on there to the left of the wiper control. Now take a look at the four-wheel drive switch there below the wiper control, and you'll notice it just says two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. There's not something that you have to pull out underneath it to toggle between two and four-wheel drive. That's because in 1984, AMC had gone to shift-on-the-fly four-wheel drive. So you could engage this while the vehicle was moving. The previous setup, you had to stop the vehicle and move the switch. And before that, the Eagles were just all-wheel drive, kind of in four-wheel drive mode all the time. The so-called select drive setup was introduced partway through the 1981 model year that allowed you to toggle between two and four-wheel drive. But again, in 1981 you had to stop and then use two hands to move that lever over to effect that change. You'll also notice the fresh air vent, or the automatic squid deployer you see there to the left of the steering column, that you pull out and you get fresh air coming out of the vents. And here's a better look at the interior from the passenger side. Notice that gauge package. You have 4 different gauges. The leftmost is a clock, then you have a voltmeter, then you have oil pressure, and then the rightmost is a vacuum gauge. Ooh, so you know what kind of economy that you're getting. Of course, if you step in the accelerator more, clearly you're burning more fuel, but nonetheless, it has that vacuum gauge, and it has a Ford Mustang shifter there. So AMC was using a number of components, obviously, from other manufacturers because they didn't have their money to develop it on their own. The shifter in this is Ford Mustang. The steering column is GM. Under hood, there's all sorts of different components. The alternator, I believe, is a GM alternator. The ignition system is a Ford Motorcraft ignition system. The starter as well is a Ford starter. The carburetor is a Carter carburetor. So AMC was using a lot of different shared components on these vehicles to try to lower their investment costs, and frankly, they worked well. And of course, the transmission is a Chrysler TorqueFlite. So again, it worked just fine, although the engine was AMC's, and a really good 6-cylinder engine at that. You can also see the AM/FM cassette radio. The radios in these AMC Eagles and the speakers are actually really good. The stereos sound great, to be honest, especially for the period. Beneath that, you have the HVAC controls. There's no vacuum-operated damper doors on these, which was pretty typical of the AMCs of the era. So if you want the air only to come out the bottom by the feet, you have to manually close off the vents so that happens. Of course, it'll come out by your feet, but if you only want the airflow to come out there, you have to flip that little switch there, as an example, in the center stack between the 2 upper vents to close those off. You also have to manually close off the vents that are in that package shelf. Maybe a bit tacky for a near $15,000 car in the time frame, which would be about $40,000-ish today. Very expensive car, but it was fine. Here you can see the seats and this awesome seat cloth pattern. AMC had gone away from the tartan check pattern to, I guess that's a houndstooth, and I think both look good, but the seats were comfortable in these. They had recliners standard, so there's no armrest in the middle, which you kind of miss, but both seats do recline. Now, one of the things the Eagle didn't do overly well was rear seat room, and it looks somewhat roomy in this picture, but trust me, it's really not that great. And that probably owes to the fact that this platform dated back to 1970 in the AMC Hornet, and it was just rebadged and re-engineered a bit into the Concorde and then re-engineered into the Eagle. But I will say, if you own one of these, they drive really, really well. They don't have a lot of power, but the 6-cylinder is very smooth, plenty of torque. The transmission is great. The steering is shockingly very precise in these vehicles. The brake pedal feel is pretty good. Overall, I would just say they're enjoyable drives. They're not overly quiet on the inside, but they're not overly noisy either. They're pretty decent when it comes to sound insulation, and it's just a fun vehicle that you don't see on the road anymore, and one in great shape like this is really a gem. And here's a picture from under hood with AMC's 258 cubic inch inline 6-cylinder engine. You can also notice the GM Power steering pump in there, in addition to all the shared components that I was mentioning before. Really good engine. By this point, Jeep was starting to put their higher output 4-liter 6-cylinders in their Cherokees, but the Eagle soldiered on with what it had, and it worked just fine, truth be told. Very reliable engine. I really can't complain. I wish they had a little bit more power, but it's just fine. I mean, my 1982 Eagle with the 258 cubic inch 6 is just a pleasant drive. A lot of the times when you're sitting in a stoplight, you don't even know the engine's running. It's so smooth. So again, can't complain about that. I think it's overall a good powertrain for this car. Well, and there you have it, a walk around of this 1986 AMC Eagle 4-door sedan. A very rare car indeed. If you happen to know where this one went, drop me a line. I'd just be curious to see where it ended up. It was a great car. It had no rust underneath. It just needed a new headliner, new exhaust, new tires, that body repair work in the rear, and a few other things. And as a consequence, I just ended up passing on it because I had one already and didn't feel like I wanted to take on this mini restoration. But these are great vehicles if you can find them, or the Concords as well. Just really fun to drive, look like nothing else. And frankly, they're very pleasant cruisers just to drive down the road on the freeway or around town. So hope you enjoyed this spotlight on this loaded 1986 AMC Eagle sedan. Thanks again for watching.